Hello, you got Mr.
and Mrs.
Smith, and we are your 5-day credit restoration challenge instructors. And this is another video in conjunction to a post that we put up. And we just want to give you an answer, but also provide some documentation to go along with it, which is why you don't see our beautiful faces as we speak. But the poll question in particular was where we said Carolyn won't answer her phone when a call comes in from a number she does not recognize because she is dodging a debt collector. Can Carolyn legally stop the debt collector from calling even though she legitimately owes the debt? And we told people to explain their answer. Many of you got this correct. You want to break it out, Quinn?
Yeah, you guys, a lot of you did get this correct. The answer is yes. Actually, what Carolyn can do is send a cease and desist letter stating that she does not want to be contacted by phone and that she actually wants to be in communication via the mail only. Now, this is what you got to understand, because she does legitimately owe the debt. This will not stop a lawsuit or any attempts to collect that debt. It's just a matter of you guys knowing your rights. What you got to understand is that letters also can give you more proof, and it's always good to have a paper trail, all right? It's so important. Now, this information is brought to you by the FDCPA. Okay, now you're going to hear us talk a lot about the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is the initials are FCRA, but this information comes from the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Okay, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act are the laws for debt collectors to abide by. And we actually have some documentation here on our screen. You're looking at section 805, and we're going to go over some of the rules that they should actually abide by.
Absolutely. So what you're looking at is an excerpt from the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, because we feel that documentation beats conversation any day of the week. So with this day of the week, we want to show you some documentation. And as you can see, we're reading from the subsection 805, and it says communication in connection with debt collection. Communication with the consumer generally without the prior consent of the consumer given directly to the debt collector or the express permission of a court of competent jurisdiction, a debt collector may not communicate with the consumer in connection with the collection of any debt. And there's a couple of things that we want to list and elaborate on. Number one, at any unusual time or place when known or which should be known to be inconvenient to the consumer. So this is what you got to look at. It says, in the absence of knowledge of circumstances to the contrary, a debt collector shall assume that the convenient time for communicating with a consumer is after 8 o'clock and before 9 o'clock. Local time at the consumer's location. So it's based on your location. So if they contact you at 7:30 a.m. and you're in the Central Standard Time and it's 7:30 your time, then they're violating that act. Or if they contact you at 9:15, they are also in violation. So they have to contact you accordingly. So this is what you got to understand. You have to know your rights, because there may be some things that they're violating already. Let's go into number two. If the debt collector knows the consumer is represented by an attorney. I won't dive too deep into that, but if you have an attorney and you let them know, hey, I just want you to speak with my attorney, guess what? Then they have to speak with your attorney. If you actually have one and you've been able to connect them to your attorney by some means of communication, they have to speak to your attorney, and they no longer are able to contact you. Number three, at the consumer's place of employment. You see, many jobs have some type of, basically some rules that keep them from having to be contacted, or it pretty much prohibits the consumer from receiving such communication. So you can let them know, hey, you're contacting me during my work hours. My employment prohibits me from being contacted about these things. Now, this is what I want to speak on before I talk about the cease and desist letter. As it relates to the phone calls, sometimes you may encounter a person or a debt collector who calls you, and they may say, hey, this call will be recorded for training purposes or whatever reasons. And if that's the case, before you give them the cease and desist letter, now what you can do is say, okay, that's great. You know, if you give me a minute, I want to record this call as well, because you have the ability to record that call as well. For one, they may may violate your rights in some of their communication. But two, you're letting them know, because you do have to let them know that you are recording the call, but you're letting them know that you're recording it, and it may put them at the edge of their seat. So it had them, you know, a little, I guess, trying to counter what it is that you're saying. And if they do, you can basically say, hey, is it, if they're going against what you're saying about wanting to record it, you can say, hey, is it safe to say that you're advising me on what I'm able to do as it relates to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act? And depending on their answer, they may be in violation. But you just need to know your rights and understand that if they're recording, you can record as well, and you should record as well, so you can make sure your laws are protected. Now, let's talk about the cease and desist letter, because that's what this part is all about, the ceasing communication. So we told you yes was the answer, but here's why. If a consumer notifies a debt collector in writing that the consumer refuses to pay a debt, or that the consumer wishes the debt collector to cease further communication with the consumer, the debt collector shall not communicate further with the consumer with respect to such debt, except to advise the consumer that the debt collector's further efforts are being terminated. 2, to notify the consumer that the debt collector or creditor may invoke specific remedies which are ordinarily invoked by such debt collector or creditor, or, where applicable, to notify the consumer that the debt collector or creditor intends to invoke a specified remedy. If such notice from the consumer is made by mail, notification shall be complete upon receipt. So the moment that they receive a letter, that's what this is basically talking about. If you give them some form of communication in the form of a letter that you don't want them to communicate with you by phone, then they have to cease it, unless they're communicating any of those 3 things that we listed. So it has to be done upon receipt of that cease and desist letter. So this is where that kicks in. These are part of your rights. So no need to dodge debt collectors or creditors when they're called, because your laws protect you to keep them from calling, for one, but more importantly for 2, if you backdate it with some form of a documentation such as a cease and desist letter, now you have even more proof to go along with why you want them to stop communicating with you.
That's awesome. I'm even looking at right here on D where it says consumer defined. It says, for the purpose of this section, the term consumer includes the consumer's spouse, parent, if the customer is a minor, guardian, executor, or administrator. So they can't be in communication with anybody, okay, if that's what you've stated and you've sent that letter. All right, you guys? So I hope that you've learned something new.
I hope you're fired up, because
yes,
this is just the beginning. We haven't even got into the 5-day challenge, but we just want to provide you with some value to let you know, look, you're in good hands. We want to put you in position to be empowered and operate from a level of professionalism as it relates to boosting your credit score, and it can be done the way we show you how to do it. So that's all we got for this video. I hope that answers your questions. If you have any questions, put it in the comments, but more importantly, get ready for these next 5 days, because it will be action-packed with action steps at the end of each training. And if you have other people that you know may want to participate, you have a little time to invite them to this challenge so that they can benefit as you benefit.
Yes, you guys, know your rights. That's all we have. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, signing out.